have my master's degree in architecture from Andrews University. I worked for different corporate architecture firms. Finding the right people is the hardest part. I would say to a certain extent that's true. In general, there are a lot of people in the world that are waiting to work for you or work with you. So that can be platforms like Fiverr, that can be Upwork, that can be agencies, things like that. It's usually not a challenge to find somebody that has a specific skill.
What do you feel like is the most challenging part about starting a business?
That's a pretty common question, but I think the answer is unique. So for a lot of people, it's just simply having the money and being able to survive and bridge the gap in between when you start a business and when you hopefully start earning money from that business.
I'm sure you've put together many teams in the past 10 years or so, however long
Yeah.
you. Welcome to American Gypsy Podcast. I'm your host, gypC, and today I have a special guest, Joshua Sanabria. He is the CEO of a few startups, including Go Architect and Engage. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
And can you introduce yourself and give us a little background in what you do?
Sure. Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm the CEO of Go Architect. So we're a urban planning and design firm here in Chicago. So I live in downtown Chicago, and we've been around since about 2018. And we work a lot with civic projects and educational projects, and basically organizations that need to think about what the next 10, 20 years of facilities are, whether that's building new buildings or repairing buildings. And then all of that, of course, because they are public groups or public institutions, a lot of times they need to put their proposals out to the public. So there's a lot of community engagement, there's a lot of feedback gathering and that process. So we also create software like Engage, which is a unique survey tool that we made last year and are still improving to properly engage the community in ways that work, that are fast, less expensive, more accessible, things like that. So we kind of do design, but we also do software and try to be as entrepreneurial as possible.
Okay. And how did you get into this line of work? Is architecture something you studied or?
Yeah. Yeah, so I have my master's degree in architecture from Andrews University. It's a small school in Southwest Michigan. So I did that in school. After I graduated, I worked for different corporate architecture firms. During that time, I got involved in the very niche area that we now work in. Again, working with school districts and civic groups, things like that, going to a lot of meetings, speaking up front to community members, things like that. And then the time came, it was the right time to try something new in 2018. And just figured, if we're ever going to try something, now's the time. And so started Go Architect, and we've been evolving and figuring things out, but definitely making progress over the last couple of years. So I graduated, let's see, it's 2014. So it's been 10 years and done a lot of adventures along the way.
And what do you feel like is the most challenging part about starting a business?
That's a pretty common question, but I think the answer is unique. So for a lot of people, it's just simply having the money and being able to survive and bridge the gap in between when you start a business and when you hopefully start earning money from that business. So for example, for the early part of Go Architect, we tried to do educational materials. So we were working already with educational institutions. So we were trying to make like books and online classes and all kinds of things where it took a while to develop those materials. It took a while to sell them. And then in the end, it wasn't the right business because we needed a massive amount of scale. For example, with books, you need to sell tens of thousands of copies of a book to really make a good profit on that. So that kind of time that it took to figure the business out and all of the elements of the service, architecture, urban planning side, it took, it took 2 to 3 years to really figure that out. And so in my case, I was very fortunate that the people that I used to work for came on as clients. And so I was able to have that income be relatively steady throughout. And then also in my case, I was very fortunate that I supported my family while my wife was in school, and then she graduated and we switched, and she was able to support us while I started the business. So we kind of switched roles. And so without her, it really wouldn't be possible. And without those clients that came on board from basically day one, it would not be possible. So there was a lot of things that came together at the right time, and that was very challenging to orchestrate. Even before that happened, I had tried for years to line up investors and clients and things like that, and I just couldn't get it. So I think a lot of people have that challenge of, unless you're fortunate to come from a wealthy family or wealthy spouse or something like that, coordinating the just sheer dollars to bridge the gap is quite challenging.
You mentioned you've changed the way you cultivate clients and things like that.
Mm,
What are some things that, because that is a huge challenge when you're starting a business, is really
sure.
cultivating the clients and finding your target market. And I know there's
Yeah.
strategies for that. So what is your perspective on,
Yeah.
when you're first starting out, how to cultivate your clientele?
Well, I think it comes down to knowing 100% who your client or customer is. So in our case, again, we work with school districts and other architecture firms and civic groups. And that's a pretty small world. I mean, in the grand scheme of, 350 million people in the United States, the number of clients that we have is in the low hundreds or low thousands. So you have to recognize that you aren't going after everyone in the world or everyone in your country or state or even city. You're targeting a very specific group. And once you can narrow it down to that specific group, it becomes much easier because then you know, okay, what is let's say, sample client? So who are they? Where are they hanging out? Where are they getting their information? So that could be, trade magazines, trade shows, conferences, all that kind of stuff. And once you can narrow it down and say, yes, me belonging to this group and going to these, 3 different conferences will put me in direct connection with my clients. Okay, now I can register for those conferences, right? And that's of course a B2B relationship, but the principle is the same. If you know exactly who your customer is, it's much easier to go out and try to talk to them. So, as much as possible, work to find out who your customer is, because that's going to eliminate a lot of the waste that you'll, inevitably spend otherwise.
Mm. Um, I'm sure you've put together many teams in the past 10 years or so, however long
Yeah.
you've been running your business. What are some things you've learned from, from the past up till now? Some things that other entrepreneurs when they're putting together a team, some things that they should keep in mind?
For building a team.
Yeah.
You know, people always say that finding the right people is the hardest part. I would say to a certain extent that's true. In general, there are a lot of people in the world that are waiting to work for you or work with you. So that can be platforms like Fiverr, that can be Upwork, that can be agencies, things like that. It's usually not a challenge to find somebody that has a specific skill. You can go on Upwork and you can type the project that you are looking for, looking to do, and Upwork is, you know, motivated and incentivized to help you find that team member or that contractor. So I think it's not so much how to put together the team. It's once you have people that you think are good, it's what do you actually do with them? And I think it's, you know, now when most things are on Zoom or online or asynchronous, you still need to have regular check-ins with everyone. And this can be very simple. So in our case, I have a weekly meeting with every single team member. And we know that we are going to meet every Monday morning or every Tuesday morning. And so at the very minimum, we are connecting once a week for, 30, 45 minutes, in addition to Slack messages and things like that. So I would recommend getting in the habit of connecting with every person that you are, connected to in your team, set up a regular thing. And I think maybe the flip side is that when people have too many meetings and it's just so random and they're on the books for no reason. And I think that has its own challenges, but the worst case, I think for me, is when people just go unnoticed and they don't know what to do and they don't know when to ask you questions. And to be honest, because of the distance, you may not form those relationships with a long distance team member. And those relationships are important. So I would suggest don't be afraid to put things on online marketplaces to find the right people. And then once you do have people on board, check in with them all the time and make sure it's a regular thing so that the sense of communication is always open.
Yeah, I think that's super important, especially nowadays with remote work and your
Hmm.
team being all across the world.
Right.
I've been on different spectrums of that where you feel like it's a lot of workplaces they complain about meetings, but I've been on the other side where there's not enough meetings and you're kind of don't
Sure.
know what's going on. So I do agree to have a proper company culture. You
Yeah.
can
The
meet.
balance is
Yeah,
there is a balance, certainly.
because
I
I
would say the flip side is meetings that have more than like 4 or 5 people are kind of wasteful.
mm,
Because once you get beyond 4 or 5, then people are checked out. The video isn't on. They're not participating. Those are the meetings that are annoying when you just show up and you know you have actual no purpose in the meeting.
yeah. Why do you feel like that's uh, as far as having a smaller meeting versus a larger meeting?
Well, because meetings should be about action items, right? And so every person on that call should have some sort of action item or element that they are contributing to. And realistically, let's say a meeting is, 60 minutes. If you have 5, 6 action items, that means that you have 10 minutes on average for each one. Just to explain what an action item is might take 2 to 3 minutes to discuss it, another 5 to come up with a resolution, maybe another, 4 to 5. So already right there, you've burned through 10 minutes on one action item. And that's if you're lucky, right? That's assuming that you don't talk for 20 minutes on one. So if one person is in charge of one action item, you can really only fit 4 or 5 in an hour if you are decently, analyzing and deciding on each one. So if you have 10 people on a meeting, that means half of them have nothing to say usually, or nothing really to contribute if you're only getting to four or five. So I don't see the point in having just observers, right? That's something that they can get later on in Slack or from another team member, or we have all kinds of AI summary tools now. Read the summary. There's other ways to get the information rather than them sitting there and wasting, at least in our case, right? It would be a billable hour that they're just spending for no reason.
Yeah. Personally, what are some things that helped you? Um, do you have any rituals or things that help you when you're having some challenges with your business?
Hmm. Like business challenges or what type of challenges?
Sorry, let me rephrase that question. I meant more of, okay, let me rephrase that and I'll cut that part out. Um, what are some personal qualities and habits that have helped you succeed in being an entrepreneur?
Hmm. Well, I think on a personal basis, I think it's important to have different types of communities in your life. So, for example, right, I am married, and so my wife and my, immediate family then is one community, and we talk about certain things. But it would be unfair to expect that she is also an expert on, software programming or something that we might be working on at work. So then let's say we have different friends or different colleagues or mentors that I can talk to about software and design. And then there's a different group that's more about, activities and sports. And we go out and we do stuff in town. And then, I go to church on Saturdays and they're a different group entirely, right? They're more about community and fellowship and that kind of aspect. And so each one of these groups or people has a different role. And I think the challenge that I observe in most people is that they put too much pressure on any individual one. They expect their spouse to know everything about everything and be interested in everything. It's unfair, right? You're not interested in everything.
Right.
So I think you need to have different communities for different purposes, different time periods, maybe even different seasons of your life, if you want to view it that way. But I think cultivating each of those relationships, each of those communities has been really helpful. And to be honest, a big part about why I live in a city is that you have access to many types of communities. I volunteer as an art teacher twice a month, and I go teach a art class in the evenings. And I just do it for fun, right? And that's just a completely different community. It's very hands-on. It's very, left brain, right? It's
Yeah.
completely a right brain. It's completely different than anything I do for work. It's different entirely. So I'm fortunate to live in a place where you can find those people relatively easily. So I guess make sure you're living in the right place is a good tip.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good tip because having the different spaces for different outlets of your life, because I think
Hmm.
we all made that mistake of, having one group or person be that everything, especially our
Yeah.
spouses.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's-
It's been helpful. Spread it out.
Speaking of community, can you explain Engage a little bit and what that software does?
Yeah. So Engage is a free software that we created, and it's a survey tool. But what makes it unique is that it's similar to doing a sticky notes activity in person. So just imagine we have a community meeting and we have a printed board and we give everyone sticky notes and they they write their little comment and they stick it on the board, right?
Mm.
Now, the challenge with that is that people write sloppy. Maybe not everyone speaks English. The sticky notes can get lost. If they're placing their sticky notes, let's say on an image of a building or of a, site plan or something, it's important what they said, but it's also important where they placed it on the image, right? Because we need to know where they're talking about or where their feedback relates to. And so this kind of in-person activity is something that's been done for ages with all kinds of community engagement for civic projects, for educational, even commercial stuff. And we were thinking about this, and I was like, why don't we just take this same activity but make it digital? So we can upload an image to a survey. We can send that survey to thousands of people. They can still type their sticky note and click on the image of where they want to place their sticky notes. But now it's digital, right? So we can gather feedback much faster. We can read what they said. We can translate what they said if necessary. We can better save it because now we don't have to have like an intern or something retype all the sticky notes. It's
Mm.
just there's so many components of it being better. And so it did not exist. And so we made it. And so we programmed it from scratch. We've used it now on several projects. Anyone on this podcast can go to engagebygo.com, engagebygo.com. They can sign up and they can use it for free. And honestly, it has uses outside of architecture also. You can combine different question types. So, for example, you could do a sticky notes question with an image of a outfit or a dress or something, where you could gather feedback on that. And then the next question could be an email capture form, and so it could be a marketing funnel for gathering leads, for example. So yeah, it's just it's kind of a way that we have fun. We explore, we solve our own problems a lot of times, and yeah, I'm happy with how it came out, actually.
Yeah, that's cool. How does it integrate with any other software?
Yeah, so you can integrate it with Zapier, which is like a middle, let's say a data collection or a data funneling service. So, for example, if you have an email capture question in Engage, once somebody submits that, Zapier is the middle connector between sending that email then to MailChimp or any other email provider. So Zapier has like, I don't know, ridiculous amount, I don't know, 10,000 softwares or something that it connects with. So by extension, yeah, we do connect with all that.
I feel like I've actually used Engage before for one of my clients. That's
Possible.
like it sounds familiar. That's why I was asking if it. Um, but yeah, Joshua, thank you for your time and coming on this podcast. Is
Of
there
course.
anything you want to leave the listeners with before we close it out?
Um, no, thank you for your time. And I guess check out Engage. It is free to use. So hopefully people find it useful.
And for the listeners, I'll have all of the links that Joshua mentioned in the description, as well as ours. Thank you for listening. If you would like to be a guest on the show, email americangypsy@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Peace.
Great.
Sorry, I hope I wasn't all over the place.